Lisa stood in front of the large mirror, adjusting the sparkling white dress that hugged her body perfectly. Today was her wedding day, the day she had dreamed of for years. The soft glow of the afternoon sun poured through the grand windows of the bridal suite, making her dress shimmer. The air smelled of fresh roses, and joyful music played in the background. She turned and saw her 16-year-old daughter, Emily, sitting on the couch. Unlike the excited bridesmaids chatting nearby, Emily looked tense. Her arms were crossed, her lips pressed together, and she kept staring at her phone. Lisa frowned. "Emily, are you okay?" she asked gently. Emily looked up, hesitating before answering. "Yeah, I guess." Lisa sighed, walking over to her daughter. "Sweetheart, I know this has been hard for you," she said, placing a hand on Emily's shoulder. "But Mark is a good man. He cares about us." Emily forced a small smile but didn't say anything. She had never been thrilled about her mother marrying Mark, but Lisa had always believed it was just teenage stubbornness. After all, Mark had been kind to them. He took them to fancy restaurants, bought Emily expensive gifts, and always had a charming smile. A knock at the door interrupted them. Lisa's best friend, Sarah, peeked inside with a wide grin. "It's time." Lisa felt her heart skip. This was it. With one last look at her daughter, Lisa grabbed her bouquet and stepped out of the room. The grand wedding hall was breathtaking. Golden chandeliers sparkled above rows of beautifully decorated chairs filled with guests. White and pink flowers lined the aisle, leading up to the altar where Mark stood, smiling in his sharp black suit. The music started. The crowd turned as Lisa entered, her arm wrapped around her father's. She felt her heart race. Mark's warm eyes met hers, and she smiled. This was her moment. Everything was perfect. But just a few feet behind her, Emily walked stiffly, her heart pounding for a different reason. Her fingers clenched her phone, the screen glowing with an unread message, a message that could change everything. As Lisa walked closer to the altar, Emily hesitated. Her gaze flickered to a mysterious woman sitting in the last row. The woman's eyes met hers, filled with urgency. Emily's stomach twisted. Something was very, very wrong. She glanced at the message again. The words burned into her mind. "Stop the wedding. He's lying to your mother. He's dangerous." Emily swallowed hard. Her fingers felt cold. Her mother was just steps away from saying, "I do." Emily knew she had to make a choice. Would she stay silent and hope it was all a mistake? Or would she speak up and risk ruining the wedding? As the officiant began to speak, Emily's breath quickened. She had to decide. Now, Emily stood at the back of the wedding hall, her hands cold and shaking. She kept staring at the message on her phone. "Stop the wedding. He's lying to your mother. He's dangerous." Who sent this? Was it a prank? Or was it real? She looked up and saw the mysterious woman sitting at the last row. The woman was staring at her, eyes filled with urgency. Emily's heart pounded. Was she the one who sent the message? The wedding ceremony continued. Lisa stood in front of Mark, her face glowing with happiness. The guests watched in silence, smiles on their faces. Everything seemed perfect. But inside, Emily felt like she was drowning. Her fingers hovered over her phone. Should she show the message to her mother? But what if it was a mistake? What if it ruined everything? Her chest tightened. She turned her phone off and slid it into her dress pocket. Maybe she was overthinking. The officiant cleared his throat. "We are gathered here today to witness the union of Lisa and Mark." The words echoed in Emily's ears. She forced herself to breathe. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe Mark really did love her mother. Maybe. Her phone vibrated again. With shaky fingers, she pulled it out and glanced at the screen. Another message. "You don't have much time. Check his real name. Look up Mark Daniels. He's not who he says he is." Emily's stomach dropped. She looked at Mark. He was smiling, his arm gently holding Lisa's. He looked so calm, so confident. Emily quickly opened an internet search on her phone. Her hands trembled as she typed Mark Daniels' criminal record. Her breath hitched. The first link. A mugshot. Her heart stopped. Same face. Same eyes. Same man. Mark Daniels, wanted for fraud, identity theft, and lying about his past relationships. Emily's head spun. She felt dizzy, like the whole room was tilting. She looked up again at the woman in the back row. This time, the woman gave her a small nod, a knowing look. Emily's fingers curled into fists. Her mother was about to marry a man who had been lying from the very start. She took a shaky breath. She couldn't stay silent. She had to stop this. She turned to the wedding guests, her voice shaking. "Wait, Mom, don't do this." The room went silent. Lisa turned, confused. "Emily, what's wrong?" Mark's smile faded. His grip on Lisa's hand heightened. Emily's voice cracked as she took a step forward. "He's lying to you, Mom. He's not who you think he is." Gasps spread through the crowd. Mark's jaw clenched. Lisa's face paled. The perfect wedding was about to take a shocking turn. The room fell into a heavy silence. Every pair of eyes in the wedding hall was fixed on Emily, whose voice still echoed in the air. Her chest rose and fell with every breath, her heart hammering in her ears. She had spoken her truth, but now she was unsure if she had done the right thing. Lisa, standing at the altar, turned to face her daughter. Her expression was a mix of confusion and disbelief. "Emily, what are you talking about?" she asked, her voice trembling. Emily took a deep breath, trying to steady her shaking hands. She couldn't back down now. This was bigger than her fear. It was about protecting her mother, the one person who had always been there for her. "Mom," Emily began, her voice shaking but steadying with each word. "He's not who he says he is. I found out something about him." She paused, her eyes scanning the faces of the guests. They were all watching her, some in shock, some in disbelief. Mark, who had been holding Lisa's hand just moments before, stepped forward, his face turning red. His voice was low but tense. "This is ridiculous, Emily. You're making a huge mistake. I love your mother. I would never hurt her." He reached out to take Lisa's hand again, but she stepped back, still looking at Emily with a mix of confusion and concern. Emily couldn't look at Mark anymore. Instead, she glanced down at her phone and quickly brought up the information she had discovered. I found his real name," she stammered. "Mark Daniels. He's been arrested before. He's been lying to us. Mom, he's not a good man." Lisa's eyes flickered from Emily to Mark, then back again. A cold wave of realization started to wash over her. She was no longer certain of the man she had been about to marry. Mark's jaw tightened. He was no longer smiling. "You don't know what you're talking about, Emily," he snapped, his voice sharp. "Someone's just trying to ruin this day for us. You think you can just make up lies." He turned to the guests. "This is all nonsense. Don't listen to her." Lisa shook her head slowly, the truth starting to sink in. She felt a growing panic inside her chest. "Mark, what is she talking about?" Her voice cracked, the words coming out weak and unsure. Emily swallowed hard, trying to stay calm. I can show you the pictures, the records," she said, her hands shaking as she held up her phone. "This isn't a joke, Mom. Please listen to me." Lisa's face was pale, her hands trembling. "Mark," she whispered, her voice full of confusion, "is this true? Are you hiding something from me?" Her eyes searched his face, hoping for an answer, but all she saw was anger. Mark took a step forward, glaring at Emily. "You've gone too far," he growled. But Lisa didn't back away. She stood still, her heart racing, her mind filled with doubt. She didn't know who to trust anymore. The wedding was unraveling, piece by piece. The vows that were meant to unite them now seemed impossible to say. Lisa felt a sinking feeling in her stomach, her dream of a perfect day slipping further away with every passing second. The room was filled with a heavy silence, the tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. Lisa had a choice to make, but she didn't know if she was ready to face the truth. Lisa felt as though the world had stopped spinning. Everything around her felt blurry, as if the entire room had faded into the background. Her heart raced in her chest, and her mind was flooded with questions she couldn't seem to answer. Emily, her daughter, stood frozen, still holding her phone. Her eyes were filled with determination, but there was also fear of what would happen next. Lisa turned back to Mark, her gaze searching his face for any hint of truth. Was it possible that Emily was wrong? Could all of this really be a mistake? Mark's face was flushed with anger, his hands clenched at his sides. He was shaking his head, trying to dismiss the accusations. "Emily, stop it," he snapped, his voice low and harsh. "You're being manipulated. Someone is trying to tear us apart." But Emily wasn't backing down. She didn't falter as she held out her phone, showing Lisa the screen. Lisa hesitated before looking at the pictures and documents Emily had pulled up. The first thing that caught Lisa's attention was the mugshot, a photo of Mark. It was blurry and dated, but unmistakably him. Below it were details about his criminal past, fraud, identity theft, and even a story about his previous wife, who had been left with nothing after he disappeared. Lisa's breath caught in her throat. The words felt like a slap in the face. She had always thought of Mark as the perfect man for her, someone who had swept her off her feet with his charm and kindness. How could this be true? How could she not have seen it before? But there was no denying the evidence now. She could feel her stomach twist into knots. Everything she thought she knew about Mark was falling apart before her eyes. Mark stepped forward, his voice trembling with frustration. "You don't understand, Lisa," he said, his tone now softer, almost pleading. "I did things in the past I'm not proud of. But I'm a different person now. I love you. I swear I do." Lisa looked at him, her heart heavy with confusion. Her mind was screaming at her to run, to leave him and never look back. But a small part of her, the part that had loved him, was desperately trying to believe him. Was he really changed? Or was this just another lie to cover up his true nature? Before she could say anything, the mysterious woman from the back of the room stood up. She had been silent until now, watching everything unfold with calm eyes. As she walked forward, the crowd parted, and Lisa felt her pulse quicken. The woman stopped in front of Mark and turned to face Lisa. "You deserve to know the truth," the woman said quietly. Her voice was steady, but there was a sadness in it that sent a chill down Lisa's spine. "I'm his real wife. He's never divorced me. He's been living a double life." Gasps filled the room. Lisa's eyes widened in disbelief. The woman reached into her bag and pulled out a stack of legal documents. "These are the papers that prove everything. He lied to both of us," the woman continued. Mark's face turned pale. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He was speechless. Lisa's knees weakened, and she grasped the edge of the altar for support. Her whole world had just shattered. The man she had trusted, the man she was about to marry, was not the person she thought he was. The woman's words echoed in Lisa's mind. "You deserve the truth." But the truth was the hardest thing to face. The man she had loved for so long had betrayed her in ways she never imagined. And now, with every piece of the puzzle falling into place, Lisa had to decide whether she could ever trust again. Lisa stood there, unable to move, as the reality of the situation sank in. Mark, the man she had thought was her soulmate, stood frozen in front of her. The shock on his face was clear, but so was something else. Anger. His perfect world was crumbling, and Lisa could see that he was starting to panic. He took a deep breath and stepped toward her. "Lisa, listen to me. This isn't what it looks like," Mark said, his voice trembling. He was trying to stay calm, but there was a flicker of desperation in his eyes. Lisa took a small step back, her hands shaking as she held onto her bouquet for support. "Mark, I don't know who you are anymore," she whispered, her voice barely audible. You've been lying to me." "No, no, I haven't." Mark's voice grew louder as he moved closer to her, but Lisa instinctively took another step back. The guests were silent, unsure of what to do. The woman with the legal papers had already stepped aside, letting the scene unfold. "I love you, Lisa," Mark continued, his voice thick with emotion. "I made mistakes in the past, but that's all behind me now. I've changed. You have to believe me." Lisa looked at him, her heart torn. The man she had planned to spend the rest of her life with was now a stranger. The smile he had once flashed her with so much charm, the love he had shown her, all seemed like lies. How had she been so blind? The woman, who had revealed herself as Mark's real wife, stood quietly in the background, watching the unfolding drama. Lisa turned her eyes back to her. "How can I believe anything now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The woman's face softened, and she took a step forward, handing Lisa a copy of the documents. "You deserve the truth," the woman said gently. "Mark's been living a double life for years. He's never been divorced. He's not the man you think he is." Mark was becoming more frantic. "I told you, this is all a misunderstanding. She's lying." He turned to the woman, pointing a shaking finger at her. "You were nothing but a mistake. I was young and stupid, but I'm better now. I love Lisa, not you. She's the one I want to be with." Lisa's heart raced as Mark's words sank in. She had spent so many months dreaming of their future together, but now all of it seemed to be falling apart in front of her. Could she really trust him after everything she had learned? Could she continue to be with someone who had been hiding such a huge part of his life from her? For a moment, Lisa couldn't find the words. She just stared at Mark, her mind spinning with all the lies, all the broken promises. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Lisa spoke, her voice shaky but determined. "You lied to me, Mark. You lied to us both. And I can't be with someone who hides the truth." Mark's face twisted with rage and frustration. "Lisa, please," he begged. "Don't do this. Don't let her ruin everything we've built." He reached out, trying to grab her hand, but Lisa quickly pulled away, her heart pounding in her chest. Emily, who had been standing silently beside her mother, finally spoke up. "Mom, you don't have to listen to him anymore. We have the truth now." She walked over to her mother and stood beside her, offering a small, reassuring smile. Lisa looked at Emily, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. Emily had been right all along. Mark, seeing the strength in Lisa's eyes, stepped back. His shoulders slumped, and for the first time, he looked defeated. The wedding that had once seemed so perfect had now come to a heartbreaking end. Lisa couldn't help but wonder how she had missed the signs. But one thing was clear now. She had the truth, and the truth was all that mattered. As Mark turned and walked away, Lisa knew that her future was uncertain, but she also knew one thing. She was free from the lies, and that was the first step toward finding a better path for herself and her daughter. The room was still, but the tension was thick. Lisa stood frozen, her heart aching as the truth continued to sink in. Mark, the man she had trusted with her life, had just been exposed for who he really was. He had lied to her, manipulated her, and kept secrets from both her and Emily. As the guests continued to whisper among themselves, the reality of the situation set in. Lisa glanced at the woman who had revealed herself as Mark's real wife. She had been quiet for a while, standing off to the side, her eyes filled with sadness and determination. The woman's face softened when she saw the pain in Lisa's eyes. She walked slowly toward Lisa, holding out the stack of legal papers. "I know this is hard," the woman said gently. "I never wanted to ruin your happiness. I only wanted to make sure you knew the truth." Lisa looked at the woman for a moment, her emotions mixed. Anger, confusion, and sorrow all swirled together. She had always believed in love, in the fairy tale endings, but this wasn't part of the dream. The woman's voice broke through her thoughts. "You deserve better. I can't undo what he's done, but I want to help. I don't want to be part of his lies anymore. I just want the truth to come out." Lisa nodded slowly, taking the papers the woman offered. As she looked over the documents, the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. The woman had been through so much, more than Lisa could have ever imagined. She had been betrayed by the same man who had been lying to Lisa all along. Just then, a low murmur spread through the crowd. The guests shifted uneasily as they watched the exchange. Lisa felt like she was standing in the middle of a storm, trying to keep her balance while everything around her swirled out of control. It was then that something caught her attention. She noticed a man standing near the back of the room, his eyes fixed on the scene unfolding before him. He wasn't anyone she recognized, but there was something about him that seemed familiar. The man stepped forward, his eyes meeting Lisa's with an expression of calm understanding. He was dressed in simple clothes, and his presence was so quiet that it was almost as though he hadn't intended to be seen. Lisa's heart skipped a beat as she realized something. The man was the one who had sent Emily the mysterious text earlier that day, the one that had warned her about Mark. He was the one who had known the truth before anyone else did. Lisa felt a mix of surprise and gratitude. "Excuse me," the man said quietly, his voice soft but firm. "I know this must be overwhelming, but I couldn't just stand by and let you marry a man who was hiding so much. You deserve to know the full truth about Mark." Lisa's breath caught in her throat. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man smiled, his eyes kind but serious. "I'm someone who cares about the truth. Mark has hurt too many people. I couldn't let it happen to you too." Lisa looked around at the shocked faces of the guests. Some were still trying to process everything that had happened, while others were quietly murmuring to one another. She felt an odd sense of relief wash over her. In a strange way, the pieces were finally coming together. The truth had been revealed, and she wasn't alone. As the man spoke, Lisa's heart finally began to slow. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. She had made the right choice. She had uncovered the truth, and in doing so, she had freed herself from a future that could have been full of more lies. The uninvited guest had brought with him a light in the darkness, and for the first time in a long time, Lisa felt like she could breathe again. The wedding hall was a scene of chaos. The joy and celebration that had filled the air just moments ago were now replaced with disbelief and confusion. Guests were whispering in hushed tones, some looking at Mark with shock, while others turned their attention to Lisa, who was still standing at the altar, holding the legal papers that had exposed the man she thought she loved. Lisa couldn't believe it. Her mind was still trying to catch up with the events of the past few minutes. She looked at Emily, who stood beside her, her face a mix of relief and worry. Emily had been right all along. She had tried to warn her mother, and now everything was out in the open. Mark, on the other hand, seemed desperate. He was pacing, running his hands through his hair, and his face was pale with frustration. "Lisa, please, this isn't what you think," he begged. "This is all a misunderstanding. Someone's trying to ruin everything." But Lisa wasn't listening to him anymore. The trust she had in him was shattered, and all the lies he had told her flooded her mind. There was no going back from this. "Lisa, please," Mark continued, his voice rising with panic. "I've changed. I love you. I really do. This woman, she's lying. I'm not the man she says I am." The woman who had revealed herself as Mark's real wife, standing in the background, shook her head slowly. "You're still the same man, Mark. You've been lying to everyone. It's time for the truth to come out." The room was growing tense. Lisa didn't know what to do. Her hands trembled as she clutched the papers, her mind racing. The guests were watching, some with sympathy, others with judgment. She felt a wave of nausea wash over her. How had she been so blind? How could she have missed all the signs? And then, a voice from the back of the room broke through her thoughts. "We need to call the police," someone said quietly, their tone filled with concern. Lisa looked over to the source of the voice. It was one of the wedding guests, a woman she recognized from her book club. The woman was staring at Mark, her expression serious. "He needs to be stopped before he causes any more harm," the woman added. At first, Lisa didn't know what to do. She was still in shock, unsure of what the next steps were. But as she looked at Emily, who nodded at her, she realized that there was no turning back. The truth had been exposed, and Mark's lies couldn't go unchallenged. With trembling hands, Lisa pulled out her phone and dialed 911. As the phone rang, she glanced at Mark, who was now standing still, his face pale and eyes wide. The desperation in his eyes was clear. He was trying to keep control of the situation, but it was slipping away from him. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's voice came through the phone. Lisa took a deep breath, steadying herself. Yes, I need to report a situation. There's a man here. His name is Mark Daniels, and he's been lying to everyone about his past. He's been arrested for fraud and other crimes, and I just found out he's been hiding his real identity. There was a pause on the other end, and Lisa could hear the operator typing in the background. Thank you for the information, ma'am. We'll send officers to your location right away. As the call ended, Lisa felt a sense of finality settle over her. The police were on their way. Mark's actions would finally have consequences. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew one thing. She wasn't going to let this man continue to control her life. The guests looked at each other, some still unsure of what had just happened, while others began to whisper. Lisa stood tall, her heart still heavy, but now full of determination. She had made the hardest decision of her life, but she had done it for herself and for Emily. And soon, Mark would have to face the consequences of his lies. The sound of sirens grew louder as the police arrived, breaking through the tense silence that had fallen over the room. Lisa felt a cold shiver run down her spine, but a strange sense of relief also washed over her. It was finally happening. Mark, the man who had deceived her for so long, was about to face the consequences of his actions. Lisa stood at the altar, her hand still shaking as she looked at Emily. Her daughter's eyes were filled with both concern and strength, and Lisa could see the quiet pride in her. Emily had been the one to warn her, to stand up for what was right. And now, everything was falling into place. Mark was still standing there, frozen in disbelief. His face had gone pale, and his eyes darted around the room, trying to find some way out of the situation. He had always been good at escaping trouble in the past, but this time there was no escape. The truth had caught up with him, and there was no way to run. The officers entered the room, 2 of them in uniform, their faces serious. One of them, a woman with dark hair and a no-nonsense attitude, approached Mark. She didn't hesitate, didn't waste time with questions. It was clear that the evidence Lisa had provided was enough. Mark Daniels, she said firmly, you're under arrest for fraud, identity theft, and other related charges. Please come with us. Mark's face twisted with frustration and panic. This isn't right. I didn't do anything. You don't understand. But the officers weren't moved by his protests. They calmly took his arms and placed handcuffs on him. The sound of the cuffs clicking shut seemed to echo through the hall, and for the first time, Lisa felt the weight in her chest lift slightly. She was no longer trapped by the lies. As the officers led Mark away, Lisa stood still, watching the man she had once loved being escorted out of the room. His eyes met hers one last time, and there was something in them that made her stomach turn. There was no apology, no remorse, just anger and bitterness. He hadn't changed. All the promises he had made to her were empty words. The room was silent. The guests, who had been part of the celebration just moments ago, were now caught in a mix of disbelief and shock. Some looked at Lisa with sympathy, while others seemed unsure of what to say. But Lisa didn't care about their reactions anymore. She had seen the truth, and that was all that mattered. Emily walked up to her mother, her expression soft but filled with understanding. You did the right thing, Mom, she said quietly, taking her mother's hand in hers. You didn't deserve this. Lisa smiled faintly, squeezing Emily's hand. Neither did you, sweetheart. I should have listened to you sooner. Together, they watched as the officers guided Mark out of the building and into the waiting police car. It was over. The man who had almost ruined their lives was finally being held accountable for his actions. As the car drove away, Lisa felt a strange sense of peace settle in her heart. She didn't know what the future would look like, but she knew one thing for sure. She was stronger now. She had faced the truth, and with Emily by her side, she could face anything. The wedding had turned into a nightmare, but in the end, it had led to a new beginning. A beginning where Lisa and Emily could move forward, freed from the lies and betrayal that had tried to keep them trapped. The road ahead might be uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Lisa felt ready to walk it. The wedding hall was now quiet, the echoes of Mark's arrest still hanging in the air. Lisa and Emily stood together, their hands tightly clasped. The guests were slowly beginning to leave, their murmurs filling the room as they made their way out. It was strange, how something that was meant to be a day of celebration had turned into something completely different. Lisa couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. Her heart still ached, but there was a sense of clarity now, a sense that the weight she had been carrying for so long had been lifted. She had finally faced the truth about Mark, and in doing so, had freed herself from a future built on lies. Emily looked up at her mother, her eyes soft and full of understanding. "Mom, are you okay?" she asked gently, her voice filled with concern. Lisa nodded, taking a deep breath. "I'm getting there," she said, her voice a little shaky but filled with determination. "It's just, I didn't expect this. I thought I knew who Mark was. I thought he loved me." Emily smiled faintly, her eyes filled with a wisdom beyond her years. "I know, Mom. I know. But now you can see that you're strong enough to handle this. We'll get through it together." Lisa smiled back, her heart swelling with pride. Emily had always been the strong one, the one who had been there for her through everything. And today, Emily had proven how right she had been about Mark. Lisa hadn't listened before, but she was listening now. As the last of the guests trickled out, Lisa took one more look around the hall. The decorations that had once seemed so perfect now felt like a distant memory. The flowers, the chairs, the empty altar, it all seemed so out of place. But despite the way things had turned out, Lisa knew one thing. She had made the right decision. She hadn't let the lies continue, and she had protected herself and Emily from a man who never deserved their trust. Emily turned to her, her expression full of warmth. "You know, we could still make today special," she said with a twinkle in her eye. "Maybe not the wedding part, but we could go get ice cream or do something fun. Just the two of us." Lisa couldn't help but laugh, the tension in her shoulders easing. "Ice cream sounds perfect," she said. "I think we both need a little sweetness after all this." As they walked out of the hall together, Lisa felt a sense of hope rising within her. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel afraid. She had her daughter by her side, and together they could face anything that came their way. The day had been full of surprises, but in the end, it had led to something beautiful: freedom. Lisa was no longer trapped in the web of lies that Mark had spun around her. She was free to choose her own path, to live her life on her own terms, without fear of betrayal. And as she and Emily walked toward the parking lot, laughing and talking about what they would do next, Lisa realized that sometimes the most unexpected moments can lead to the greatest new beginnings. She didn't need a wedding to find happiness. All she needed was the truth, and the love of the one person who had always been there for her, Emily. Together, they were ready for whatever came next.